I'm here today with Andy Rogers. Andy is an author and an editor at HarperCollins Christian Publishing. He's edited previous books, including one for writers called Jot That Down, encouraging essays for new writers. He's also been published in short fiction in Splittany Magazine, Catapult Magazine, and on dailysciencefiction.com. And he's written other things as well, too, that we'll learn more about here in a moment. But Andy's a great guy. He's spoken at some of our Publishing in Color and Writing for Your Life conferences. And it's really a pleasure to speak with him about a new book that's coming out for young adults, children. We'll talk about exactly what the target market is for this. But Andy, it's great to have you here.
Oh, thank you very much, Brian. It's great to be here. Appreciate your time today.
So I should also mention that Andy's website is andyrogersbooks.com.
Correct.
It's ROGERSBOOKS. So andyrogersbooks.com.
It's Rogers like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, but not like Aaron Rodgers, the football player, who has a D in his name.
I always confuse people's spelling because of that D or not D.
Yep. No D.
So Andy, before we got to get into the new book, maybe you could tell people a little bit more about your background beyond what I just described.
Sure. Yeah. So I've been in the publishing industry now for 13 years, I think, or 14. I started out in retail working at Baker Bookhouse, which is one of the largest independent Christian bookstores in the country. It's in Grand Rapids. And from there went into publishing, and I've worked for Zondervan. I've worked for Our Daily Bread, and which was also Discovery House at the time, two organizations in one there. And then now I'm back at Zondervan again, and I'm an acquisitions editor for Zondervan Books, which is nonfiction for adult Christian readers. And I've loved the whole experience. Somewhere in there, around 2009, I think I joined a writers group, and that's when I really started writing outside of my job, and started to pursue short fiction. That was my first interest, and I got some of those first stories out there. I started to try and write poetry. Quickly learned that I'm no good at that, but I still enjoy it. But short fiction, and I started writing music reviews for a small paper in Grand Rapids, like CD reviews. And then from there, it just grew, and eventually I was able to work on some book projects.
That's very cool. I mean, what a great background. So first, let's talk about maybe some of the Zondervan, or Discovery House books that you've done. Can you talk about a little bit about those?
Sure. So my first go around at Zondervan, I was in marketing. Then I went to editorial when I moved over to Our Daily Bread and Discovery House. And at Discovery House, I was able to work on the first memoir I had ever worked on. I was able to acquire and edit devotional material. I eventually started writing devotionals for a product they had called Our Daily Journey, which was sort of like Our Daily Bread, but aimed at a slightly different audience and a little bit longer format. And it was just a joy. Some of the writers I worked with, I still keep in contact with now. I was there over 4 years. One writer in particular I'll mention, Sheridan Voisey.
Sure, yeah.
S-E-Y, yeah. He's a great writer, a broadcaster. He's in Oxford, but he's Australian, but he lives in Oxford, and has published many places, but I got to work on one of his books. That's a favorite from that time period at Discovery House, the book Resilient. And then at Zondervan, I've been able to work on a number of books. Right now, as we're doing this interview, a book I acquired, which is hitting the market right now, is by Darryl Strawberry, the great baseball legend. He wrote a book called Turn Your Season Around, which tells the story about how he went from where he was as a recovering addict and a new Christian to where he is now, which is as a traveling evangelist. And it's really his story of these are the biblical principles you need to follow to change your life. And so as an editor, I work on one piece of the project, and then it moves on to marketing and goes on. I'm one small part in a big machine, and it's really Darryl's Daryl's book, Daryl's show, but it's so fun to sit and watch his video interviews and listen to his podcasts, hear the interviewers get excited. Pretty soon we're going to start to see Amazon reviews pop up, from real life consumers that are reading the book and having their lives changed. I love that part about any project I work on, finally getting to see consumer reaction, see the authors out there doing their thing. That's a unique privilege I think editors and other publishers have. So, if you follow Daryl Strawberry online, I'm sure you'll hear about the book. That's a great book to check out.
Well, good. I mean, I live in the New York metropolitan area, and so that's going to be a high market for his work because he spent so many years at the Mets.
Absolutely.
He did the Yankees also?
Yep.
Or just the Mets?
No,
he was both?
He won World Series with both of them.
Wow.
Yep. And we've had great reception by New York media. He's been on a lot of the New York papers. He's been on podcasts, some sports talk radio. So yeah, we've been very pleased, and that's just one example. I mean, there's so many authors I get to work with that, they're in all different spheres and all different pockets of the market. And it really is a joy to think I had a small part in that. I helped that happen a little bit, and to get to see it flourish and really see how God is using an idea. I saw it when it was an idea and helped it grow a little bit. Now it's a real thing, and the authors out there doing their work and living their mission and doing everything they can to spread their message. It's just fun. It's fun to see that happen, especially when consumers start leaving reviews and, talking about it online, and it's just very, very fulfilling.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, maybe you can put Daryl Strawberry's publicity person, from HarperCollins in touch with me. We can do a book launch interview.
Hey, I'm sure he would.
That'd be great.
I'm sure he would.
So let's talk more about your writing. All the different types of things that you've written, including books, coming up to this point where you're introducing a new one.
Sure. So the first one I wrote, you mentioned already, is called Jot That Down. And this was a product of events. So my writers group, I'm in a writers group with 4 others. And we started to host free events that are in the format of a TED Talk. Though when we launched it, we just called it the Jot Conference. We didn't really realize what a TED Talk was. Like, this was before it was as common as they are now. So it's a free event at a local bookstore, and we'd invite 3 writers in, and we give them each 20 minutes and say, you got 20, and we didn't pay them anything. There was no money. This was not a business. There was no money exchanged. It was just a email list and a website, and we're going to gather writers together just to talk about writing because we need encouragement as writers. The guys in the writers group I was in, we all felt like we benefited so much by camaraderie and having somebody cheer us on. And we thought, well, what if we created these events that would give us a chance to network and meet other writers, and it would give all those people that come a chance to feel that same camaraderie. So we did that for 5 years. We had 2 events a year, every 6 months. And we had a great time. We called it the Jot Conference, as I said. And so I worked with publisher Caffeinated Press out of Grand Rapids to create a handbook where we just asked the presenters, take your ideas, turn them into essay form. And we have this toolbox now for writers. So there's an essay in here on how to write a book proposal, an essay on how to work with an agent and find an agent, why you need one. There's an essay in here on how to write a kid's book, what's unique about it, how to write poetry. It's we really tried to create, like I said, a toolbox so that wherever you are as a writer, you can pick it up, flip to the essay that's most pertinent to you, and go. So this was great fun. It's been great to share this at writers conferences. There's always people that need this kind of information, especially when it comes to contacting an agent. I find a lot of writers are nervous about that. So we got a great essay in here by Tim Beals. He wrote a great one for us. And then also kids books. We even have one in here on writing comic books by a published comic book author, which, unless you're in that world, you don't know what that takes, And so it's fascinating for me to read it and to hear him talk at our conference. And then the new book that just came out is called Dive In Devotions for Kids. And this is a Christian book. This is aimed at 8 to 12-year-old kids. It's 101 devotionals. This one I wrote on my own. And this was pure joy to write. It was parts of 2019, a lot of 2020, when we were all first coming to grips with the pandemic and understanding how that was altering our lives. It was great for me to have this project that I could focus on. And it boiled down to how I could introduce the Christian faith to kids, which is a unique task. And for me, was a great joy because it got me to think about my faith in whole new ways. So I'm very proud of it.
Very cool. Very cool. And who is this book published by?
This was published by Barber. So Barber Books out of Ohio. It's on Amazon now. It's at major retailers. Actually, through Christmas, I was posting on, because it came out just before Christmas, I was posting on social media. You can find it at Target, on their website, on Walmart's website, on Barnes & Noble, on Amazon. I mean, most people go to Amazon, but during Christmas, if you are using any of those apps, you could find this book on any of those. So it's
cool. Well, it sounds like it's a companion along with a kid's study Bible. Is that correct?
There is a study Bible. So I wasn't involved in that. I knew the editor for that book, and he spoke with me about writing this one. So I knew the editor of the study Bible, the Dive In Study Bible, and he said, I'm going to turn this into a whole line. I'm looking for some good writers. I have children in the age group of this book, and I had worked with him on other projects in the past. So that's how this came about. It was I think the devotional writing I did when I was an Our Daily Bread employee and editor opened the door for this devotional book, and the fact that I live in the target audience helped. And also, I personally love to make the Bible less intimidating. I love it when I work on a book as an editor or as a writer that can get people excited about reading the Bible, unafraid to ask their questions, unafraid to read the weird parts and not have a neat and perfect answer, but stay close to the text. Read it, pray about it, focus on it. That just personally gets me excited. And that's what I tried to do in this book. I didn't want to write a devotional that was too focused on obedience. It's age appropriate to teach 8 to 12-year-old kids, hard and fast rules, like don't touch that, it's hot, you'll burn your hand. Don't lie to your parents, but at the same time, I didn't want to present Christianity in a way to that formative age group that made it feel like it's nothing but a set of rules. And you're either doing it right or you're doing it wrong. And so I had a lot of fun writing this, thinking about how do I connect the kid reader with the person of God? Like, it's not just about don't lie. It's about God is great. God is truth. God loves you. A good example of this is the stories you hear about in Sunday school or at church about the Israelites complaining in the wilderness. I think there's two ways you can tell that story. You can tell it so that the moral of the story is don't complain. God doesn't want you to complain. Complaining is wrong. That is true to a point and wonderful, but it's bigger than that. Another way to tell that story is, isn't it amazing that God loves people no matter how much they complain? Isn't it incredible that God's patience never runs out, that his mercy is never ending, that he provides for even the biggest whiners? It's a shift in focus on, are you doing it right, to isn't God incredible? And that was something I really tried to do in this book, really trying to be sensitive to how I was introducing Christian ideas to kids. And it was so much fun.
That's very cool. Wow. So, I can't even imagine personally trying to write to that age range. How did you adjust your writing to, make it devotionals for, is it middle grade? Is that the right
Yeah,
terminology for that?
yeah. It's middle school, and then it's into the middle grades. Or excuse me, it's elementary school, the upper elementary school, and into the middle grades. So there's a practical tool I used, which is just reading level tests online, and there's tons of these. They're free. You can copy your text, put it in, and hit the button, and it will tell you more or less what reading level you have
Hmm.
written. And it looks at like the length of sentences, your vocabulary, words, et cetera, those types of things. That's, practical. A kind of real life tool is my own family. I have a son who's in 5th grade. And for example, like writing about God's love, one of the devotionals in here, I talk about how you love pizza, because what kid doesn't love pizza? And you love video games, and you love to go to the movies, and you love to stay overnight at grandma's house. But all of those loves eventually stop. You go home, you finish the pizza, the movie ends, you beat the video game. What about, is there a love that lasts forever? So it's just the practice
Wow.
of taking something a child would understand, your target audience would understand, and connecting it with the idea. And it wasn't always easy, but for me, it was like a spiritual exercise, because it forced me to always think through, what do I really believe about God? What do I really believe this particular verse is teaching me? And once I know that, how on earth am I going to teach that to a kid? It was hard sometimes, but it was like paring down. It was taking away all the religious language or assumptions or things you believe and you don't even know why you believe them, and forcing me to really wrestle with, if I've got 3 minutes with a 10-year-old's time to talk to them about God's love, what's the most important thing to say? And nothing else.
Very
It
cool.
was a great exercise as a writer.
That really is. As you said, it forces some things, right? That, are pretty important, actually.
Yeah. One of the hardest verses for me to write about, actually, because each devotional has, one verse at the top. And I tried to not just make that like a tag on, but really write from that verse. One of the hardest ones was John 3:16, which, we could all quote it. But what I wrestled with was, every time I sat down to write about it, I felt like I was writing beyond it. And I kept having to come back to say, what does John 3:16 actually talk about? Because I was adding in all of these other things. It talks about God's only son. It talks about believing in him, and it talks about eternal life. But I kept adding on other things like, God loves you. God will help you get through the hard times. God will, whatever. They were all true things about Christianity, but that one verse in particular, I really had to wrestle with. Just focus on, what does that say? Because if you go too big, it's like you're hitting kids with too many ideas all at once. You really need to boil it down to one memorable thing. And it just, during the writing, I scrapped my article on John 3:16 multiple times. It really was one of the hardest ones.
Well, focus is a good attribute in many, many different things. So
yeah. There's I don't know if this is true or not, but there's this quote that I've heard attributed to Mark Twain, who seems to get all kinds of quotes attributed to him. But he writes a long letter to his friend, and he says, I would have written you a shorter one, but I ran out of time.
Yes.
The idea that writing in a focused way is the challenge. And for me, writing devotionals for kids was a workout. It was a challenge, but it also was personally fulfilling to do it.
You'll get a kick out of the exercise that I have people go through in my class, The Business of Being a Spiritual Writer. We work on elevator pitches.
Yeah.
Which is exactly the same thing that you're describing. You have to say what you want to have folks hear very, very succinctly and very, very clearly.
Absolutely.
It's very challenging to do that.
That's a great discipline for writers. I have writers do that in the proposal process before I've been able to get a book through to a contract, when I'm still working with the writer and agent on, is this book really?
Yeah, yeah.
I do that same thing, because if you can't do that, you might not know exactly what your book is about, which sounds weird to say.
No, absolutely.
You need to boil it down. Like I said about this book, it's a toolbox for new writers. Like that came from that exercise. So if anyone ever asks me, what is that? I'm not going, well, I'm not going into the whole story about it being a conference.
No, you want the tagline.
No, it's a toolbox. It's a book of essays for writers to help them get started. It's just boom. That's a really good discipline.
Well, that's really great to see how that, affected your writing in the book too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and this book too, it's compartmentalized because it's 101 different in and out. It's not a novel. And for me, the way I ended up writing it was I actually wrote a handful of them, more than a handful, on my phone, on the notes app, because I have a young family. I work full time. I'm writing late at night and I'm writing early in the morning and sometimes on my lunch break. So I have a notebook I was writing ideas down or full articles sometimes on my phone. Sometimes I'd write a full article in an email and email it to myself. This book, more than any other project I work on, was a Frankenstein in that sense, where it was like I wrote it wherever and whenever I could to make sure I got a certain amount in every week. And then once I had the 101 in rough shape, then I could do my favorite part as an editor, which is revising. And then I made it all as clean and as artistic as I could before sending it to the editor. But it was really drafted in all over the place. Notes and emails and notes on my phone.
Well, at least it lent itself more toward writing in the cracks, like
Exactly.
you're describing, as opposed to some other books that might not be that way.
Sure. I've never written a novel, at least not one that's been published. The novels I have written won't see the light of day. I can't imagine, I don't know how novelists do it, if they could do it in that same way, or a historian writing a massive tome, if they could do it in the same way. But for me on this project, it really worked. To be able to dip in, focus on love and this one verse for 25 minutes and get a skeleton of the devotional article and email it to myself, and then not think about it for a while until I have time later in the night after the kids are in bed. That really worked.
Well, again, it's like some of these communication tools that we have now, right? Like you said, email things to yourself. I do that on myself all the time. I'm thinking about something, I want to get it captured, and then I want it to show up, in my inbox the next morning. So I deal with it,
Yep.
And so it's just kind of funny how we use these things for different purposes.
Well, I've gotten that question before at writers' conferences about how do I find time to write? How do I make time to write? And I've told people the same phrase you used, which is writing in the cracks, because I heard that from someone else. For me, it's very true. Most of the writers I work with as a Zondervan editor are not full-time writers. What I mean is their writing isn't necessarily what pays their bills. They also have a job. They also have a family. They also have a million other things going on. And so I'll tell them, I've lived it myself, and I tell people at conferences, like, books are written in the cracks a lot. I think it's more of a dream to have your dedicated writing space with a meadow in front of you out the window and 6 uninterrupted hours, and you craft 2 or 3 amazing chapters. Like, I don't know very many writers that don't at all. That wasn't my experience, and most people I work with would say, oh no, it wasn't written that way. It was 45 stolen minutes at a coffee shop and that kind of thing to get books done. So
isn't it kind of amazing though, the different processes that people use, right? There's such a diversity just between those two extremes that you just described.
Absolutely.
Some people can thrive in one or the other, but they need that version, whichever that version is for them.
Yeah. And I think too, a message for writers would be, don't be dismayed if you can't write every single day, or if you can't write for longer than 20 minutes at a time. Like, whatever your situation is, you'll be able, if you work at it, you'll be able to find something and consistently do that thing. If it's 20 minutes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, or, if it's early in the morning, 2 days a week, whatever it is, you'll be able to find it if you look for it and make it happen. Don't be dismayed that you don't have 2 hours. Nobody has 2 hours uninterrupted. I don't, at least nobody I know.
So, is there anything you can tell us about future projects? Or is it too early to talk about any of those?
No. So, I'm publishing another book with Barber. I don't have a date for when it comes out yet. I think it's going to be the end of this year, this calendar year, 21. It's called The Kid's Guide to Exploring the Bible. So we went back to the 8 to 12-year-old range, but it's focused on how does a kid actually study the Bible? And just like this book, it was a great exercise for me too. So it introduces, in age-appropriate language, a character study, a word study. How do you use the study notes in your Bible? How do you use the maps? Why are there maps in Bibles? It has a whole archaeology theme, or paleontology. So it's like you're hunting for dinosaur bones, or you're digging up treasure, is kind of the theme of the book. But it lays out basic Bible study ideas for kids. And that was great fun to write. That, again, it's called The Kid's Guide to Exploring the Bible. Another project, I did a ghostwriting project this last year that turned into a co-author project. It doesn't have a title yet. It's still being finished. But it's a true crime memoir. It was a couple in Illinois that experienced a terrible crime, and thank the Lord they came out on the other side okay. And now they're writing their story because they want to share what happened to them and how they believe God saved them. And that was a great experience. It was a lot of interviews, and taking those interviews and turning them into a story, a nonfiction story. So if you go to my website, andyrogersbooks.com, or Facebook, actually, that's probably the better place, facebook.com/AndyRogersBooks. That's the place where I post the most updates on what I'm doing. Both of those books should be out later this year. And then there's one more, a trivia book. This is a total left turn. I signed up to do a trivia book on the Star Trek franchise.
Oh man!
For a series, for a publisher that does trivia books on all different topics. So there's a Bible trivia book that somebody else did, and there's a trivia book on the 80s, and there's a trivia book coming out on the Civil War. There's all these different topics, and I wrote one on Star Trek because I'm a huge fan. Love the franchise, and so it's going to be a small. It's like the type of book you would buy either for the Star Trek geek in your life, or before going on a road trip and you're asking each other questions. It's a fun little book, but that'll be out this spring.
Wow. Well, what an honor to be selected for something like that, right?
It was a lot of fun.
I can imagine a whole slew of Star Trek, fans who would love to do that.
Yes, it was a lot of fun. I watched a lot of Star Trek in 2020. We were all stuck inside.
Oh, darn.
Yeah, I know.
It's my job. I got to do it.
I know. It's research. So,
oh, goodness.
My wife likes it too. So we both like watching the shows and having a good time. I would watch with my phone or with a notebook. There's a good one.
Well, excellent. Well, it sounds like we've got plenty of book launch interviews to do in the near future. So, please get back in touch with me on those when the timing's right.
Thank you very much. I certainly will. I appreciate it.
Well, Andy, thanks so much for joining us. It's really great to hear all the eclectic things that you are involved in, and do well. And so it's a pleasure to collaborate. It's a pleasure to hear about all of that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I look forward to being at the Publishing in Color Conference coming up later this year, this spring in 21. That's going to be great fun.
Absolutely. Well, it's always a pleasure to have you involved in any of our conferences. So thank you for that too, Andy.
All right. Thanks, Brian.
All right. Thanks again.